You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Welcome to the podcast. I hope you're having a terrific day. Today we're going to talk about how to keep calm when all calamity is falling all around you. There are some things that you can do, and I'll share with you some practical tips that I've picked up, some tools and tricks that I've picked up along the way that I think can help you out, and also something kind of fun. And I'll give you an example of that. It's a little bit more of a stretch of the imagination, but it does work. And that fun tip is when things are all of a sudden all going wrong, or it feels like they are, one thing that you can do is to kind of consider yourself as being the main character inside a story that you're going to be able to tell later in your life. Because there will come a time where you'll be able to look back and laugh on whatever the situation is that you might be enduring right now. I'll give you an example of that a little bit further, or a little bit later in this podcast. And I'm not talking so much today about some of the things that each of us face in our lives, where we're faced with incredible loss, or in some cases, some really tragic situations. You can work through those things as well. And you may have experienced something like that, or you may know some people that have experienced things like that. I've talked to some people that have experienced things like that on this podcast. They have all been able to work through it. Now, they don't necessarily look back upon those things and laugh at them, but you can work through those things. So for today, the main objective is everyday life. We all go through it. We all have what we call those, quote unquote, bad days. Sometimes when you roll out of bed and something happens and you just know it's going to be, one of those days. Well, when you can employ some of these tips and tricks and change your mindset a little bit on some of those things that are happening, you'll find that you're able to maybe take some of the negative spikes out of those bad days, or maybe lower them a little bit more and make the ride a little bit more smooth. But, it takes some effort, and it takes a choice in terms of how you're going to look at it. One of the other things to keep in mind is that, and I talk about this in one of the keynotes that I've recently crafted on embracing change. And I'm guilty of this. I've been trying to work through it, but I look around and I see so many people are expending so much energy by resisting against something that they have absolutely no control over. Change. Everything is always changing. And boy, we make ourselves miserable by fearing that and resisting that. I wonder where fear of change is on people's lists. I know that public speaking is right up there. For me, great white sharks is on the list as well. I don't fear that so much while I'm here in my studio talking to you, but I stay out of the ocean because of that one. But change. People bring so much misery upon themselves by tensing against and resisting and stressing over stuff that you have absolutely no control over. It's the complete opposite of staying calm. But there are some things that you can do about it. So I guess my first tip would be this. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to what happens to you. And you're going to find that how you choose to respond, that can have either a positive or a negative ripple effect on your experiences. So anytime something comes up, whether it's something as simple as a flat tire, or, you're waiting on your kids, they're making you late for an appointment because they won't get their room cleaned, or they're taking too long in the washroom, or you can't find your keys, or somebody's bumped into your car. Your imagination could run wild about all these things that end up happening that all of a sudden throw a fork in the road, and now your day's off kilter. Well, whatever that case might be, you now have a choice. You can rail against that and make yourself miserable and jump to the victim mindset and woe is me, and then you're just breeding negativity inside of you. Or you can just take a step back for a moment, and right there in that moment, and I'm not saying this is easy, but I am saying it's possible, you can choose whether you want to react or whether you want to respond. And there is such an enormous difference between the two. When you choose to respond, you empower yourself to get some equilibrium back into your emotions a little bit more quickly than you might otherwise, and you may end up at a more positive solution more quickly, and you're going to find that whatever that spike in negativity is, that bad experience that you didn't want, whatever that happens to be, its effect on you is going to fade into the background a lot more quickly than if you just bang, snap, react. Defenses go up, the cortisol streams through your body, you feel like you're under attack. We all know how that feels. We've all done it. We all still do it. I'm no different. And this is something that I'm working on, but I've made some progress with, so I thought I would share with you. So some practical solutions. What are some of the things that you can do? Well, right now, hopefully you're in a situation where you're listening to this, where you're calm and you're relaxed, and I hope that you're having a good day, or certainly a good part of the day. So right now, while you're in that state, just ask yourself this. Is there anything that has happened to you in your life so far that you have not been able to handle? Think about that for a second. Is there anything in your life that's happened to you so far that you have not been able to handle? Because if you weren't able to handle it, I could argue that you wouldn't be here to listen to and consider this at all. You see the point here? Everything that's happened to you so far, you've been able to get through it. One way or the other, battered and beaten sometimes, maybe emotionally scarred, but you're still going, right? One foot in front of the other, you and I, we're still here, no matter what has happened to us. Now, we may have a lot of stuff in between our ears that we're trying to deal with. We may have some scars on our hearts. All of us do. But you and I, we're still here. There's nothing that's happened to us in our lives so far that we haven't been able to handle, at least in that moment, and continue moving on from. Now, there may be some things that we're still carrying with us, some heavy baggage that we haven't yet put down or processed, and that's a separate conversation probably for another day. But whatever's going on now, so whenever these little calamities pop up and they feel like the end of the world when they are around, you can handle it. You will get through it. To empower yourself with that idea, look back on the past. I'm not asking you to dwell on negative experiences, but again, I'm talking about all those little everyday things. You get into work and somebody lumps something on you that you weren't expecting, and all of a sudden your day is ruined. Your day doesn't have to be ruined. You can choose to respond rather than react. That's a choice that you can control amidst everything else going on that you cannot. So there's one tip. Ask yourself, what has happened in my life so far that I have not been able to handle? And chances are the answer is probably going to be you've been able to move on from just about everything else. Here's another tip. And this is a word that I thought was just for, everybody else. Meditation. I had for a long time an idea of what I thought meditation was. People sitting cross-legged with their fingers connected and their eyes closed and floating on clouds and chanting mantras and things like that. Not that I'm talking down on that idea, especially if you could sit on a cloud. Can you imagine that? That would be a trip. But the idea of just trying to spend even a few minutes to just sit still and get quiet and let whatever's going on in your brain go on. I think a lot of people, certainly I fall into this group, have an idea about meditation that, number one, they think it's weird, and so they're never going to do it. But then if you can get past that like I did and thought, okay, I keep hearing people talk about it, so I think I'll try it. And then you finally sit down, whether you close your eyes or not, and there's just this cacophony of voices in between your ears that thoughts are racing by at light speed and things pop up that you haven't even considered in years, and you think, what in the world is that about? And I must be doing it wrong, because aren't I supposed to have stillness, inner peace, quiet? So this is incorrect because I'm hearing more voices than ever. No, you're not wrong. But even just the act of sitting still, even for just a few minutes every day, what you're going to do is you're going to force yourself to sort of sit still and let those thoughts go by. And you're building an ability to respond rather than react. You're building a little space between your mind and your mouth, your thoughts and your actions, without even really being aware of it. So even if you can manage to just kind of sit still with those thoughts, if you're lucky and after you get better at it, you will have periods where your mind quiets down and you will experience just an extreme relaxation and peace. I can tell you that where I am in my development, that's rare for me. It's rare that I get to that state. But what's more common is that when I'll sit down and I find that guided meditations or having some sort of a sound or having a mindfulness bell or even some soft music, I find that that's more helpful to me than just sitting with absolute quiet. But by doing that, I've decided that, you know what, I can feel how urgent I feel about getting up because I've got to get this done or that done. Just while I'm sitting trying to what you would call meditate, just trying to sit still for a few minutes. Say it's a 5-minute window, and I usually do this at the beginning of every day. I can guarantee you there are going to be at least a half dozen times inside that 5 minutes where I feel like I have got to get up and go and do something that I just thought of, because if I don't do it right now, I'm going to forget what it was and it's not going to be done, and then I'm going to stress over it later. And so just recognizing that, go, okay, no, we are going to sit here. I'm going to wait. You know, I've dedicated whatever it might be, 5 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 30 minutes. But now's the time to just sit and let those thoughts go. I've described to my son, who already has started into a practice like meditation, to think of it as kind of like the difference between all of these thoughts just raging in a river. Can you picture a stream and the water's just flowing by? Well, imagine that all of those thoughts that we have every day, all of those stresses and worries and to-do lists and all of that, they're just going by like a raging river, like in a stream. And so it's the difference between being in the stream, being in there with the thoughts and just being pulled along with them, and building that awareness, that mindfulness to be up and out of the stream and standing on the bank, so that the thoughts are still there, they're still racing by, but now you're more of an observer rather than just being pulled along with them. And again, I'm full disclosure, I'm a novice as far as this is concerned. You can hear me talking to one of my favorite guided meditation providers, Jason Stevenson from Relax Me Online and meditationmasters.tv in one of the earlier episodes of this podcast. He was one of the ones that I found that really resonated with me, that could finally get me in a state where I could sit for a few minutes. But I can share with you that this is one of the single biggest benefits that I've found in improving my own situation. Building some space between my thoughts and my actions and my mind and my mouth. I never used to have a filter, and I'm telling you, you would be amazed at how many more fires you create when you really quickly react to what you think is a negative situation, and we just, bang, we want to defend ourselves and lash out or solve the situation and make it go away because it's uncomfortable. But if you can have just a little bit of space, and it doesn't have to be much, just a tiny little crack of daylight that opens up between your thoughts and your actions, so you can respond as opposed to reacting. Reacting, you're lashing out. Responding, you're choosing. And a little bit of space between your mind and your mouth. Think about what you want to say. Think about what you want to do. And is what that thought that just popped into your mouth. See, exactly, right? That thought that popped into your mind before it comes out of your mouth. You can ask yourself in that space, is this going to add value to this situation or not? Am I going to be happy if I say that thought, or should I maybe rethink it a little bit, or respond differently about how I want to contribute to the situation? I think that's a great tip. Here's another one, and this one came up in episode 10 of the podcast with David Ciccarelli. David is the CEO of a global company called Voices.com, and he talked about the 10-10-10 method. So when they're trying to make decisions, they use this method, and I think that you can also apply this when all of a sudden something's going wrong and you want to try to stay calm. So the 10-10-10, when something's happening, you're trying to make a decision, or you're trying to figure out how you want to respond to a situation, ask yourself, is this going to matter 10 minutes from now? Is it going to matter 10 days or months from now? Will it matter 10 years from now? Will it matter 10-10-10, 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, 10 years from now? Full disclosure, I can't remember whether he said 10 days or 10 months, but you get the idea. It's another something that where you can build in that responsiveness idea. And well, all of a sudden, you're left at the side of the road with a flat tire in the driving rain, and your day is ruined, and you can't believe your bad luck. And I'm not saying that's a pleasant situation to be in, and most of us have been there. I certainly have, or whatever the situation might be. But you can ask yourself, is this going to matter 10 minutes from now? Probably, because I'm probably still going to be here at the side of the road waiting for a tow truck or for somebody to stop and help me. Will it matter 10 years from now? No, probably not. I don't know where I'm going to be 10 years from now, but by the time that gets here, chances are I'm not going to even remember that this ever happened. And if I do, I'll probably be laughing about it when I tell the story. So there's a tip. 10, 10, 10. You can ask yourself that. Here's another one, and this also came from one of my podcast guests, Sean Vieg of Sean Vieg Fitness. That was a really fun discussion. That was episode 15. He was talking about how it's interesting how things tend to loom really large in our lives for a while, and then they just sort of fade into the distance after a time. And we were talking more specifically about a video that he had done called Sunrise Yoga. It was a really popular video. It had, I think, hundreds of thousands of views. And somebody lodged a complaint about it saying that he had used music that he hadn't used. And it ended up where that video got pulled down from YouTube. He had some, however that system works, strikes against him. It was just, basically he had done nothing wrong. And then out of the clear blue sky, somebody pops up and then just dumps basically a pile of garbage on his lap that he has to deal with. And it had to be dealt with, but he did. And you can see the response to that. I've actually got that link up on the blog post that went with that episode. You can look for it at noscheduleman.com/podcast. It's episode 15 with Sean Vieg, if you'd like to hear what he said about that. But he handled it really, really well. And that was one of the key takeaways I took from that discussion, where he talked about how things, both bad and good, they loom really, really large. And if you think about this, I think that you can probably relate, where it seems like certain things almost take our lives over at the time that we're dealing with them. But then after they're dealt with, they just sort of fade into our collective experience. So that's something that I think that you can keep in mind when you're facing something that seems kind of significant at the time, bad or good. But we're talking today about, keeping calm and, not letting your sense of personal contentment and happiness get thrown too far off track when the stuff that life throws at you comes up. That's something to keep in mind from Sean Vieg. And I think he's right. Things tend to seem really big at the time, but like they say, time heals. Stuff can fade as well. Here's another one. Before we get to, I'll share a story with you and the idea of kind of the fun way to look at this, of how to stay calm when, calamity is striking you. I think one of the reasons why a lot of us get stressed, and I know that I dealt with this a lot, had a lot of issues with anxiety for much of my adult life. And I can see now that one of the reasons why I felt like that is that I really felt like I was being judged by other people and that I wasn't measuring up. And so all of the things that were swirling around going on in my life, they kind of consume you. So when that's happening, I think it's easy to just sort of assume that everybody else is dealing with the same thing. I went through this a lot when I was the general manager of the stock car track, Delaware Speedway, stock car racing track. I'm going to tell a story from there in just a couple of minutes. But that environment was just so all-consuming to me and the other people that were in it that I lost perspective on the fact that was my world, but it wasn't everybody else's. And so I was wearing this face of stress and anxiety to people that were observing me inside my world, but basically living theirs outside of it and inside their world. Does that make sense? Do you see what I mean? So, I think it's worth remembering that people are viewing the world from their perspective, not yours. So at certain times when things are going all wrong, especially, that can feel kind of cold. Like when something major is going on in your life and yet the world continues to spin regardless of that. We've all been there, right? But you can use that idea to empower you as well, to help keep you calm. When you feel like your world is crashing down on you and you feel prone to judge yourself and you think that other people might be holding an ill opinion of you, that you should be doing better, you shouldn't have these things that are going wrong, remember, their world is spinning along and they're thinking about themselves more than they're thinking about you. And that isn't something to be taken as a slight against you. You're doing the same thing. So am I. Are you more concerned about me or your own experience? I wish the best for you, but I admit I spend more time thinking about my experience, right? So when you do that, you give yourself some time to process whatever you're handling, understanding that everybody else has their own perspective. Right? You're caught up in your own world. It seems huge to you. You might feel like other people are judging you, but more often than not, they aren't. This idea of the world continuing to spin, even though it seems cold at times, it's a really good thing to keep in mind in reverse also. So for instance, we think we know what other people are dealing with, right? We all do this. I do this, where we jump to conclusions. We judge, or we guess, but we don't know. Remember, you don't know what another person has going on in their life, whether you're caught behind somebody at a stoplight and the advanced green goes and they don't get going quick enough, or they're taking up too much room in the aisle at the grocery store, or whatever it is. Just be kind. It doesn't cost anything to just be a nice person. Be compassionate. Be considerate. We're all in this together, right? And just like you've got times where you've had things that have happened in your day or in the course of your life and journey that other people don't know about that you're trying to deal with, so does everybody else. So keep that in mind from both sides of the equation, to ease up on yourself and also ease up on everybody else as well. Okay, now I'll tell a story real quick before we wrap this up. I've given you a few different tips and hints on how to stay calm and how to maybe lower some of those stressful spikes when life happens. But here's another trick that you can use. Is that when something's going wrong, when all calamity is collapsing all around you, think of yourself as sort of being the main character inside that particular story. Like almost you're on the set of a movie. You're in the show. Because what's going on at that moment is going to be a story for you to tell at some point down the road. Now, that's tough to do when really bad things are happening, but it is doable. And think back on some of the things that have happened in your life. And I wonder if you're like me, as when you get together with family. Like, so for instance, on the rare occasions when my two sisters and I are together, we keep telling the same stories over and over and over. And it's almost never about when everything went well. It's a lot more common for us to tell the stories about just the absolute disasters that we had on family trips and things like that. And we laugh and we smile and it brings us closer together, and those are shared experiences. But at the time that those things happened, we wouldn't necessarily have been very happy about them at all. So let me give you just one example. This is a story I thought about the other day. This would have been back in, about 10 years or so ago from now. 10 or 11 years or so ago, 2005 or 6, I was the general manager of a stock car racing track called Delaware Speedway, half-mile stock car track. And for part of that time, we were sanctioned by NASCAR, and just really interesting place to be. We would start running races usually about the end of April at that time. And without getting into too much detail, the idea that we just opened the gates on Friday nights, which is when typically we would race, and then just sort of sit back with our feet up through the course of the rest of the week, could not be any further from the truth. The amount of preparation it took and the amount of logistics and the anxiety that it caused, for me anyway, just to try to get that place ready to go, to invite thousands of spectators in and have hundreds of people on race teams in the pits, and not wanting anybody to get hurt, and dealing with customer complaints and trying to have good service and worrying about the weather. And anyway, I'm getting myself spooled up. But suffice it to say that in my time there, we would start running events usually around the end of April, which meant that, at least for me, by the time we got to the end of May, I was burnt out. Absolutely burned out, just emotionally spent. And then we would be just getting into the real meat of the season here in Ontario, Canada, which is June, July and August. And then we would typically run some events through September and wrap up either at the end of September or the very beginning of October. So when the end of the season came, it was always an incredible relief to me. When we got that last event done, I would just feel such an extreme sense of gratification and pleasure. I would look forward to it all year long. Too much, I can see now, because I was taking myself out of the present, but that's another story for another day. And when we would finally get done the season, I would just rejoice in thinking, okay, we're the furthest away that we can possibly be now from having to get ready for another event. So I looked forward to it. So in that year, we ran an event. I think it was on a Sunday afternoon in early October. It was a nice day. We got the race run. Nobody got hurt. We had the crowd in, got them out. And once we started to get the facility wrapped up and then left it to the technical crew to deal with the post-race inspection in the pit area of the racetrack in the infield, once all that stuff was kind of underway, as the manager, what I would do is I would then go back to the office, which was in a portable trailer, of all things, on the top of this big hill up off the road that the track was on. So I'd go back to the trailer and I'd start wrapping up. I had a lot of paperwork to file. We would do updates to our website. But that was the time where I would start to exhale a little bit. So we got to that point. We were through the season, and I could start to feel some of these good feelings starting to rise up inside me. And that was that was always a welcome feeling. And just as I was kind of settling into that, I thought, oh, we did it. Thank goodness we're done. And then all of a sudden, I thought, what in the... Somebody was banging on the door to the trailer, and I thought, what in the... So now, even just telling the story, my stress level is starting to spike back up. What in the world is going on? So I opened the door, and there's John, one of our announcers, standing in basically what was a garden, because that door didn't actually have an actual step into it. And he was frantic. I opened it, and I was getting ready to start yelling at him, but he beat me to it. And he frantically goes, Kevin, there's a car on fire in the parking lot. There's a car on fire in the parking lot. There's a car on fire in the parking lot. In case you didn't catch that, that was, there is a car on fire in the parking lot. So I poked my head out the door, and I looked several hundred feet down toward the direction of the main entrance. And sure enough, there was, if memory serves, a red Pontiac Grand Am just completely engulfed in flames with people standing around. And I remember thinking, great. What happened after that, I recall as being almost a sort of out-of-body experience. I was so tired and so emotionally spent that I wasn't even really all that concerned, although when I arrived at that scene, it was just calamity. So that area of the parking lot was just a grass field. So this car's on fire. I still don't know what set the fire. And it was only, I'm going to say about maybe 30 feet away from a fence that separated the parking lot from the inside of the racetrack. And that fence was made of, you guessed it, wood. And there were power lines up over top of that fence. Meantime, there are these flames going up in the air from this car. I don't know if you've ever stood beside a car when it's on fire. It's quite a sight, especially when there are a few dozen people standing around it. And then there was a minivan beside this other car, and all packed full of children's stuff and whatever else. And as this car that was on fire started to have more and more flames erupt, the heat was starting to melt the plastic molding on the side of this minivan. So there was a woman amongst the crowd of those that were standing around that she started to become hysterical. And she was crying about her van, and she was going to lose everything inside of it. And I remember thinking, I don't blame her. I wonder what I should do beyond calling the fire department, which we had already done. But this racetrack was kind of out in the country, so we thought it would at least be a few minutes. Well, back to my thought there from a second ago. I don't know if you've ever stood right beside a vehicle that's on fire, but it's quite a thing. The glass from the windows, they start popping and exploding, and we were waiting for the heat from the fire to expand the air in the tires, for the tires to explode, and we're trying to keep people away from it so that if and when those things did happen, that nobody would get hurt. And of course, I was worried that the grass would set fire and then that would go over to that wall, the fence that was made of wood, that if that went up, who knows what would happen. It was a scene, and all these people standing around. We had called the fire department, and then as that's happening, this pickup truck comes racing up this hill. I don't know that I want to take the time to exactly describe the layout, but it drove up a grass hill where vehicles are not meant to go. Okay, so this vehicle's coming up over the hill, and I'm thinking, what are we going to do about this car that's on fire? And in the meantime, another person comes over to me, taps me on the shoulder. Are you Kevin? Yes. You're the manager of the racetrack? Yes, I am. Again, this is in the context of car in flames, woman screaming, people standing around. Now this guy taps me and says, I just want you to know that my vehicle has been stolen. I'm not laughing because I think that that's funny, but this is my point about this was calamity going on, right? A part of the year that I looked forward to the most, and all of a sudden it was all collapsing all around me. So I thought, okay, we've already called the fire department. I guess we can call the police too. So I said to this fellow, thank you for telling me. I'll be just a moment, and we'll contact the police and see what we can do. And I think we're going to have to try to arrange a ride home, file a report, all of that kind of stuff. Meantime, remember how I told you that truck was coming up over the hill? Well, that was the racetrack's safety truck. So it was the truck that we used during the races, that when there would be a crash on the racetrack and we would have a caution flag and the safety crew would need to go out onto the track and clean it up, that's the truck that they would use. So this truck came coming up over the hill like the cavalry and zoomed right up onto the scene and stopped right behind that minivan, which was starting to melt because of the car that was completely engulfed in flames right beside it. Out of this van jumps my good friend and our race director, who I'll just call Wilcox. Jeff Wilcox's full name, and I really hope he'll join me on the podcast at some point because he is he's a larger-than-life character. Anyway, Jeff was riding with one of our other tech inspector guys named Dan Hawkins. Dan stayed in the truck. Jeff got out, and Jeff just walked over completely calmly, didn't even look at me, went right up to the woman who was crying because of her van, that looked like it was going to succumb to the flames, and he said, "Ma'am, is that your van?" And she was crying and hysterical and couldn't really talk and didn't really answer, and completely calmly again, car on fire, popping and snapping and people hanging around and talking, and completely calm. Jeff says again, "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you again, is that your van?" And she's sobbing and crying and hysterical, and then Jeff got a little bit more insistent. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down. I would like for you to tell me, I'm just asking, is that your van?" And she was, "Yes." He said, "Would you like me to move it out of there?" And it took her a moment to sort of register what was happening. And she was still hysterical. He said, "I need you to tell me, would you like me to move your van away from the car that's on fire, but I can't do it without your consent?" Yes. Please move it." And I'm laughing because what Jeff said next became a phrase that we used whenever we knew we were headed into a potentially sticky situation. Once he had consent from that woman, he turned around, and as he did, he looked back at Dan, who was still in that safety truck, and said, "Dan, roll the windows up," because he knew that he was going to drive that truck right into where the flames were. And that's what he did. He put the safety truck from the racetrack, the nose of it, right up against the nose of that van that was parked in the grass, and just, I guess, put it into four-wheel drive. I don't know what he did, but he just basically pushed the van out of the way of this car that was on fire, and then driving right into the flames. And then anyway, if you knew Wilcox, you'd know that this wasn't a particularly stressful situation for him. It was just something that he needed to do. So he got the van clear, and that woman started to settle down, and Wilcox got out and came over to me and put his arm around me and says, "Hey, buddy, everything under control up here?" not the least bit concerned about the car on fire because he knew there wasn't a whole lot we could do about it until the fire department started to arrive. And I said, yeah, the fire department's been called. They should be here any minute. And he goes, okay, well, you need my help with these people? I said, no, I think we've got it. All right, good job. And he jumped back into the safety truck and back down the hill to finish post-race tech inspection, which was still going on. And as he was going down the hill, the fire department came back up the hill. I still don't remember exactly what we did about the fellow whose truck had been stolen, but we did get the police contacted and we did get him a ride home. And the fire department took things after they got out of the truck and they came to me. Are you the manager? Yes. Told them what had happened, told them what I knew, and they basically said, leave this to us. And I said, is there anything else that you need from me? No, we'll come get you if we need you. And so then I went back to the office to resume doing what I was doing. Nobody got hurt with that, which was a wonderful thing, obviously. The next morning when I came back to the racetrack, that car that had burned up was gone. Luckily, the flames never got to that wooden fence. But I can tell you that the parking lot, that field, the grass part of the parking lot where that incident had taken place, was this gigantic patch of scorched earth that looked like a UFO had come down and landed on it. By the next day, I was able to look at that as a story that I would have for the rest of my life, even though if you asked me if I would want to live through that again, I would tell you absolutely no. But I survived it. I've got a great story now, and that's something that you can keep in mind when calamity is falling all around you and something happens that you don't want. Remember, this is a fun tip and a little trick. Think of yourself inside a story because sooner or later, time's going to go on. And you'll be able to look back on that and and hopefully laugh about it like I am now. So to wrap up, how to stay calm when life is happening. Remember that you can't control change. Most of life you have no control over, but what you do have control upon is your choice as opposed to on whether you want to respond or react to a situation. So if you can just accept and embrace the idea, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to what happens to you. And you'll find that that's got a positive ripple effect on your future experiences because you just won't be able to be shaken quite as much when things happen. Remember, 10, 10, and 10. Will whatever's going on now matter 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, 10 years from now? If not, well, you still got to deal with it, but you can relax a little bit. Like what Sean Vigue said, remember, things loom really large in our lives at the time that they're going on, but they tend to fade as time goes on. And I'm sure you'll be able to find some examples of your own experience where that's true if you look back on your past as well and consider where you are now. Think, has there ever been anything that has happened to you so far that you have not been able to handle? No, chances are you've been able to get through all of those things, some easier than others, but you're still here. Meditation is a great tool that you can employ to build a little bit of space between your thoughts and your actions and your mind and your mouth. And remember that everybody is viewing their world through their perspective and their experience, similar to how you are as well. So when your world feels like it's crashing down around you and you feel like things are not going well enough or maybe you're being judged, give yourself a little bit of space and think about that in reverse as well, that you don't necessarily know what's going on in somebody else's life as well. So what do you think? Do you have a story like that? A time in your life where all of a sudden everything was just going wrong, but now you find yourself telling that story as an example of getting through what at the time seemed like not such a great situation? Would love to hear that. Or if you've got a thought to share along this line of how to deal with change and all of that stuff that we can't control and just be able to take it easy and how to keep calm when life happens and stuff gets thrown at us that we don't necessarily want. You sharing your experience might be a huge help to somebody else that sees that. So please leave a comment on the blog post that goes with this episode. You can find that at noscheduleman.com. This is episode 21 of the podcast. You can also do that on the YouTube feed. We post all podcasts up there as well, youtube.com/ No Schedule Man. Just look for episode 21. Maybe that's where you're listening to this right now. I'd love to hear your experiences. Thanks so much for taking some time to join me for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to having you join me for the next one. I'm Kevin Bulmer. We'll see you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.